I'll never forget the look on her face when my emotional support peacock, Napoleon, spread his magnificent tail feathers right in front of her gate. But let me back up, because what happened in Terminal C that Tuesday morning wasn't just about a bird, it was about dignity, loss, and why you should never mess with a grieving veterinarian who's spent 30 years learning exactly how federal disability laws work. The woman in the designer blazer had no idea that reporting my fake emotional support animal would backfire so spectacularly. She thought she was being a good citizen. Instead, she triggered a chain of events that would have airport security, 3 TSA supervisors, and eventually the airport's therapy animal program coordinator all marching past her gate in what I can only describe as the most satisfying parade of my 62 years on this planet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story really begins 3 weeks earlier, in a veterinary clinic in Ohio, where I was saying goodbye to more than just my practice. My name is Dr. Margaret Chen, and for 34 years, I ran a veterinary practice in Columbus, Ohio. 3 weeks before that airport incident, I'd made the hardest decision of my professional life. I was closing my clinic and moving to San Diego to live with my daughter after my husband passed away from cancer. The grief counselor had suggested an emotional support animal might help with the transition. I'd laughed at first. Me? The woman who'd spent decades telling pet owners that their animals weren't their children. But James had always said I was too stubborn for my own good, and maybe it was time to take some of my own advice about healing. That's how I ended up with Napoleon, a 3-year-old Indian blue peacock whose previous owner, an elderly woman named Rose, had to surrender him when she moved to assisted living. Rose had gotten Napoleon certified as an emotional support animal after her husband died, and she'd done everything by the book. Proper documentation from her physician, behavioral training, the works. When Rose asked if I'd take Napoleon, something in her eyes reminded me of myself. "He knows grief," she'd whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He sat with me every night after Harold passed. He understands." I thought she was being dramatic. I was wrong. Napoleon turned out to be remarkably intuitive. On my worst days, when the empty house felt like it might swallow me whole, he'd position himself right beside my chair and make these soft, almost conversational sounds. Not the loud calls. Peacocks are famous for gentle, soothing murmurs that somehow made the silence less crushing. The paperwork was all legitimate. Rose had gotten Napoleon certified through proper channels. A licensed mental health professional had evaluated her need, a veterinarian had confirmed Napoleon's health and temperament, and she'd registered him through the appropriate federal databases. When I inherited him, I had my own doctor update the documentation to reflect my circumstances. I wasn't trying to game the system. I was a professional following federal law to the letter. The morning of my flight to San Diego, I'd triple-checked everything. Napoleon's health certificate, vaccination records, behavioral certification, my physician's letter documenting my anxiety and depression following James's death, and the federal registration showing Napoleon as a legitimate emotional support animal under the Air Carrier Access Act. I'd called the airline 3 times to confirm the accommodation. I'd paid the additional fees. I'd arranged for a pet taxi with experience in transporting large birds. Everything was perfect, or so I thought. The morning started beautifully. Napoleon traveled in a specially designed carrier that allowed him to stand comfortably but kept his magnificent tail feathers from causing issues in the cabin. He was calm, quiet, and honestly better behaved than most of the children I'd seen in airports over the years. We'd made it through security without incident. The TSA agents had seen emotional support peacocks before and barely blinked. Napoleon had even charmed a few travelers who stopped to admire his iridescent blue and green plumage through the carrier's mesh windows. I was feeling optimistic for the first time in months. Maybe this move to California would be exactly what I needed. That's when I met Karen. She was impossible to miss. Mid-50s, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, wearing what looked like $1,000 suit and the kind of jewelry that screams "I demand to speak to your manager" from across a crowded terminal. She was standing near our gate, talking loudly into her phone about some business deal, making sure everyone within a 50-foot radius knew how important she was. I found a quiet corner to sit with Napoleon, pulled out my book, and tried to ignore the growing volume of her conversation. She was discussing some real estate acquisition, dropping names and dollar amounts like confetti. The kind of person who'd never learned that volume doesn't equal importance. But she noticed us immediately. "Excuse me," she said, marching over with her phone still pressed to her ear. "Excuse me, hold on David," she said into the phone. There's a situation here I need to address. I looked up from my book, already feeling my stomach tighten. 34 years of dealing with difficult pet owners had taught me to recognize trouble brewing. Is that a peacock? She demanded, pointing at Napoleon's carrier like she'd discovered a bomb. Yes, ma'am. This is Napoleon, my emotional support animal. All his documentation is. Emotional support animal? She literally laughed out loud. A peacock? Are you serious right now? The people around us started turning to look. Napoleon, sensing tension, made one of his soft conversational sounds, not loud, just a gentle acknowledgement that something was happening. Ma'am, I have all the proper documentation. I don't care what fake papers you bought online, she snapped. This is ridiculous. You can't bring a farm animal on a plane just because you slapped some vest on it and called it a therapy pet. The words hit me like a physical blow. Farm animal, fake papers. After everything I'd been through, everything I'd lost, this stranger was attacking not just Napoleon but my integrity as a professional and my legitimate need for support during the most difficult period of my life. But I kept my voice steady. Ma'am, emotional support animals are protected under federal law. I'm a veterinarian, and I can assure you that all of Napoleon's documentation is completely legitimate. Oh, so now you're a veterinarian too? She rolled her eyes dramatically. Let me guess, you got your degree from Google University? That's when something inside me shifted. I'd spent my entire career earning respect in a male-dominated field. I'd built a practice from nothing, treated thousands of animals, earned the trust of countless families. I'd held pets as they took their last breaths and comforted owners through their darkest moments. And this woman thought she could dismiss me with a smirk and a sarcastic comment about Google University. Actually, I said quietly, I graduated from Ohio State College of Veterinary Medicine in 1989. I've been a licensed veterinarian for 34 years, and I can show you Napoleon's certification papers right now if you'd like to see them. She waved her hand dismissively. Anyone can fake documents these days. I'm reporting this to airport security. This is exactly the kind of scam that ruins it for people with real disabilities. And before I could respond, she was already walking toward the gate agent's desk, her heels clicking aggressively against the terminal floor. I watched in growing horror as Karen approached the gate agent, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25, and began gesticulating wildly in my direction. Even from across the seating area, I could hear fragments of her complaints. Obvious scam, fake service animal, probably bought the papers online, making a mockery of real disabilities. The gate agent looked overwhelmed. She kept glancing in my direction with an expression that was part sympathetic, part terrified. I could practically see her mentally rehearsing whatever policy manual she'd been forced to memorize about service animals and difficult passengers. Other travelers were starting to stare. Some looked curious, others annoyed. I heard a man behind me mutter to his wife, "Can you believe people these days? Bringing farm animals on planes?" Napoleon seemed to sense my distress. He positioned himself closer to the front of his carrier and made those soft, comforting sounds that had gotten me through so many dark nights. But now, instead of being soothing, his vocalizations felt like evidence against us. Karen returned from the gate desk with a triumphant smile. "Security is on their way," she announced loudly enough for half the terminal to hear. "They take fake service animals very seriously these days." "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice professional despite the rage building in my chest, "I've told you multiple times that I have all the proper documentation. If you'd just let me show you." "Save it for security," she cut me off. "I've seen this scam before. People like you buy some exotic pet, print out fake papers, and think you can bring whatever you want on a plane. Well, not on my watch. People like you." The phrase hung in the air like smoke. I'm Chinese American, born and raised in Ohio, but I recognized the tone. The assumption that I was somehow gaming the system, somehow less trustworthy, somehow foreign to the rules that real Americans followed. 20 minutes later, a security officer approached our gate area. He was a middle-aged black man with kind eyes and the patient expression of someone who dealt with every possible airport crisis. His name tag read Officer Williams. "Ma'am," he said, addressing me directly, "I understand there's been a complaint about your animal?" Before I could respond, Karen jumped in. "Officer, thank you for coming. This woman is trying to bring a peacock on the plane claiming it's a service animal. It's obviously fake. No one needs a peacock for emotional support." She's making a mockery of people with real disabilities. Officer Williams held up a hand. Ma'am, I'll need to speak with the animal's owner directly. He turned back to me. Can you show me your documentation? Finally, someone willing to look at the actual facts instead of making assumptions. I pulled out my carefully organized folder: Napoleon's health certificate, vaccination records, my physician's letter, the emotional support animal registration, everything properly notarized and up to date. Officer Williams examined each document carefully. I watched his expression shift from professional skepticism to genuine interest. He looked up at me. You're a veterinarian? Yes, sir. 34 years. I just closed my practice in Columbus and I'm moving to San Diego to be closer to my daughter after my husband passed away. Something in his eyes softened. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. Thank you. He looked at Napoleon, who was sitting calmly in his carrier, occasionally making those gentle sounds. He's beautiful, and remarkably well behaved. Napoleon is very special, I said. His previous owner trained him extensively before I adopted him. He understands that travel requires patience and quiet behavior. Karen had been listening to this exchange with growing agitation. Are you seriously going to let her bring a farm animal on a commercial flight? What's next? Emotional support cows. Officer Williams turned to her with an expression I couldn't quite read. Ma'am, I've reviewed all the documentation, and everything appears to be in order. Peacocks are actually recognized as legitimate emotional support animals under federal guidelines, and this particular bird has extensive certification. But it's ridiculous. Karen sputtered. A peacock. Ma'am, Officer Williams said patiently, emotional support animals come in many forms. I've seen everything from miniature horses to ferrets. The law doesn't specify which species are acceptable. It focuses on proper documentation and behavioral training. This animal meets all federal requirements. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, someone who understood the law. But Karen wasn't finished. This is insane. I'm calling the airline directly. There's no way they're going to allow this circus act on the plane. And that's when Officer Williams smiled just slightly, but I caught it. Ma'am, you're certainly free to call the airline. But you should know that I'm going to need to file a report about this incident. Good, Karen said. File away. The report will note that you made a complaint about a properly documented emotional support animal, and that you used language suggesting the complaint was based on assumptions about the owner's ethnicity and economic status rather than legitimate concerns about safety or documentation. Karen's face went pale. I never said anything about. People like you probably bought papers online, making a mockery of real disabilities, Officer Williams recited. All statements made in front of multiple witnesses before you'd seen any documentation or asked any questions about the animal's training or certification. The color drained from Karen's face. I was just concerned about safety. Ma'am, if you'd been concerned about safety, you would have asked to see the documentation first. Instead, you made assumptions and then demanded I investigate based on those assumptions. That's when I realized Officer Williams wasn't just being professional. He was setting up something bigger. Dr. Chen, Officer Williams said, turning back to me, there's something I need to tell you about your peacock. My heart skipped. Had I missed something in the paperwork? Was there some problem I hadn't anticipated? When I ran Napoleon's registration number through our system, something interesting came up. It seems your bird has a rather special history. He pulled out a tablet and showed me the screen. Napoleon's registration was highlighted, and there were several official seals and stamps I hadn't seen before. Napoleon isn't just any emotional support animal, Officer Williams explained. He's part of a federal pilot program for therapy animals in high-stress environments. His previous owner, Rose Morrison, was the widow of a Vietnam veteran, and Napoleon was specifically trained to work with people suffering from complex grief and PTSD. I stared at the screen in amazement. Rose had never mentioned any of this. According to these records, Napoleon has been used in therapy sessions at 3 different VA hospitals. He's worked with grief counselors, trauma specialists, and has over 200 documented hours of successful interventions with patients suffering from severe emotional distress. Karen was listening to this with her mouth hanging open. What does that mean? I asked. Officer Williams smiled more broadly now. It means, Dr. Chen, that Napoleon isn't just a properly documented emotional support animal. He's a federally recognized therapy animal with specialized training and security clearance for sensitive environments. He turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're looking at is one of only 12 peacocks in the United States with this level of certification. Napoleon has worked with veterans, trauma survivors, and people dealing with profound loss. He's not a pet, he's a highly trained therapeutic professional. The crowd began to murmur with interest instead of skepticism. Someone started clapping. A woman near the back called out, "Thank you for your service, Napoleon." Karen looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. But Officer Williams wasn't done. "There's one more thing," he said, consulting his tablet again. As part of the federal pilot program, Napoleon is authorized to travel with a support handler if needed. And it looks like, he scrolled through more information. Yes, there's a notation here that the airport's therapy animal coordinator requested to meet Napoleon during his layover today. "I'm sorry, what?" I said. "Dr. Chen, it appears that word got out about Napoleon's travel schedule. The airport has a therapy animal program for anxious flyers and people with disabilities, and they specifically requested to meet with Napoleon to observe his techniques and potentially add him to their rotating roster of available therapy animals." This was getting surreal. So not only is Napoleon completely legitimate, Officer Williams continued, he's been specifically invited to participate in airport operations. Karen's face had gone from pale to greenish. She was realizing that she hadn't just attacked a random traveler with a pet, she'd attacked a federal therapy animal and his handler. "Officer," she said weakly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Ma'am," Officer Williams said firmly, "there's been no misunderstanding. You made false accusations against a legitimate therapy animal and his handler, you refused to examine proper documentation, and you made several statements that suggest your complaint was based on prejudicial assumptions rather than genuine safety concerns." He looked around the gate area, where a crowd had gathered to watch the drama unfold. "Now, Dr. Chen, I believe we have some people who'd like to meet Napoleon." That's when I saw them approaching a small group of airport officials led by a woman in a bright blue blazer with therapy animal coordinator embroidered on the pocket. Behind her were two more security officers, a gate supervisor, and what looked like a couple of airport executives. "Dr. Chen?" the coordinator said, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Martinez, the airport's therapy animal coordinator. We are so honored to have Napoleon here today." I shook her hand, still trying to process what was happening. "We've been following the federal pilot program very closely," she continued. "When we saw that one of the certified therapy peacocks would be traveling through our airport, we couldn't resist the opportunity to meet him and observe his techniques." She knelt down near Napoleon's carrier. "Hello, beautiful boy. I've heard amazing things about your work with trauma patients." Napoleon seemed to understand that this was a professional interaction. He moved to the front of his carrier and made a series of soft, almost conversational sounds that I'd never heard before, different from his comforting murmurs, more purposeful and engaged. "Incredible," Sarah breathed. "Look at that eye contact. The deliberate positioning. He's actively assessing the emotional state of everyone around him." She stood up and addressed the growing crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is a masterclass in animal-assisted therapy. Napoleon is demonstrating textbook therapeutic behavior. He's remaining calm in a chaotic environment, he's responding to emotional cues from his handler, and he's projecting a sense of safety and peace to everyone around him." More people had started gathering. Travelers from other gates, airport employees, even some flight crews had stopped to see what was happening. "With Dr. Chen's permission," Sarah continued, "we'd like to invite Napoleon to participate in a brief demonstration of therapeutic techniques for our staff and interested travelers." I looked around at the crowd, at Officer Williams nodding encouragingly, at Karen standing frozen in horror at what she'd inadvertently unleashed. "Of course," I said. "Napoleon loves to work." Sarah signaled to someone behind the crowd, and suddenly there were airport employees everywhere rolling out a small portable stage, setting up barriers to manage the crowd, even bringing a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah announced through the microphone, "we're honored to present an impromptu demonstration by Napoleon, one of only 12 federally certified therapy peacocks in the United States, and his handler Dr. Margaret Chen, a veterinarian with over 30 years of experience in animal behavior." The crowd erupted in applause. People were taking pictures, recording videos, calling their friends and family. What had started as Karen's attempt to humiliate me had turned into a celebration. But we were just getting started. "Due to safety regulations," Sarah continued, Napoleon will remain in his specialized transport carrier for this demonstration. However, I think you'll be amazed by what you see." She nodded to me, and I opened the front panel of Napoleon's carrier, not enough for him to escape, but enough for everyone to see him clearly. Napoleon immediately understood what was expected of him. He positioned himself at the front of the carrier, spread his tail feathers just enough to create a stunning display of iridescent blues and greens, and began making those soft, rhythmic sounds that had comforted me through so many difficult nights. The effect on the crowd was immediate and profound. Conversations stopped, children stopped fidgeting, even the adults seemed to relax, their shoulders dropping, their breathing deepening. "This is Khaled therapeutic presence," Sarah explained softly into the microphone. "Napoleon is using a combination of visual beauty, calming vocalizations, and deliberate body language to create a sense of peace and safety for everyone in his vicinity." A little girl near the front started crying, but not from fear. Her mother knelt down beside her. "He's so beautiful, Mommy," the little girl whispered. "He looks like a rainbow." Napoleon turned his head toward the child and made a particularly gentle sound, almost like a lullaby. The little girl stopped crying and smiled. "Extraordinary," Sarah said. Napoleon just demonstrated targeted emotional response. He identified a child in distress and adjusted his therapeutic approach specifically for her age and emotional state. The crowd was mesmerized. People were wiping away tears, holding hands with strangers, taking deep breaths like they'd been holding their breath for hours. And through it all, Karen stood at the edge of the crowd, watching her attempt to humiliate me transform into what was essentially a parade in Napoleon's honor. But the parade was just getting started. Sarah turned to address the crowd again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat. Napoleon's work is so valued by the Federal Therapy Animal Program that we've been authorized to offer him an honorary position with our airport therapy team." She pulled out an official-looking certificate. "Napoleon, by the power vested in me by the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Transportation's Therapy Animal Initiative, I hereby name you an honorary airport therapy animal, with all the privileges and recognition that position entails." The crowd erupted in cheers. Someone started chanting "Napoleon, Napoleon," and others joined in. But Sarah wasn't finished. As an honorary airport therapy animal, Napoleon is entitled to VIP treatment at any airport in the United States. This includes priority boarding, complimentary upgrades when available, and special recognition from airport staff. She turned to me. "Dr. Chen, Napoleon's handler, is also entitled to these courtesies as his support person." One of the airport executives stepped forward. "Dr. Chen, we'd like to upgrade you and Napoleon to first class for your flight today, with our compliments." First class. I'd never flown first class in my life. Additionally, the executive continued, "We'd like to invite you and Napoleon to be our guests at the gate during boarding, so other passengers can meet him if they're interested." The crowd was eating this up. People were taking selfies with Napoleon's carrier in the background, posting videos to social media, calling their friends to tell them about the amazing peacock they'd just met. And Karen? Karen was trying to edge away from the crowd, hoping to disappear before anyone connected her to the complaint that had started this whole celebration. But Officer Williams wasn't going to let that happen. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, approaching Karen with his tablet. "I still need to complete my incident report. Can you give me your full name and contact information?" Karen's face went white. "Is that really necessary? I mean, everything worked out fine." "Ma'am, you filed a formal complaint alleging fraudulent documentation and federal law violations. I'm required to complete a full report, including the names of all parties involved and the ultimate resolution." He looked around at the celebration happening around Napoleon's carrier. "I'm sure my supervisors will be very interested to read about how a complaint against a federally certified therapy animal turned into a demonstration that drew hundreds of people and resulted in positive media coverage for our airport." Karen looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. That's when Sarah approached her. "Ma'am, I believe you were the person who initially reported concerns about Napoleon." Karen nodded reluctantly. "I want to thank you," Sarah said with a perfectly professional smile. "If you hadn't brought Napoleon to our attention, we never would have known he was traveling through our airport today. Your complaint led directly to this wonderful demonstration and Napoleon's honorary appointment to our therapy team." The irony was delicious. Karen's attempt to cause trouble had directly led to Napoleon being celebrated and honored. In fact, Sarah continued, We're planning to use today's events as a case study in our staff training program. How one passenger's vigilance led to an incredible therapy animal demonstration. We'll need to include your name in the training materials, of course, since you were instrumental in making this happen. Karen looked like she was going to be sick. I think I need to catch my flight, she mumbled. Officer Williams consulted his tablet. Ma'am, according to my records, your flight doesn't board for another 2 hours. And I still need to complete this incident report. He looked at his notes. Let's see. Initial complaint filed at 10:47 a.m., alleging fraudulent documentation and suggesting racial bias in the complaint. Final resolution showing complaint was entirely without merit and led to positive recognition for the reported animal. Karen was trapped. She couldn't leave without completing the incident report, and every minute she stayed meant more documentation of how wrong she'd been. Tell you what, Officer Williams said with barely concealed amusement. Why don't you stay for the rest of Napoleon's demonstration? It might help me complete my report if I can document your reaction to seeing his actual therapeutic capabilities. And that's how Karen ended up standing at the edge of the crowd, forced to watch as Napoleon received a hero's welcome from hundreds of travelers and airport staff. As Napoleon's impromptu demonstration continued, something beautiful began to happen. Travelers started sharing their own stories of loss, trauma, and healing. An elderly veteran approached me with tears in his eyes. Ma'am, he said quietly, I haven't felt this calm in an airport since I got back from Vietnam. There's something special about that bird. A young mother with 2 children explained that her daughter had severe anxiety about flying, but Napoleon's presence had completely relaxed her. Could we take a picture? For her memory book? Over the next hour, dozens of people approached to thank Napoleon and me. They shared stories of their own emotional support animals, their struggles with grief and anxiety, their gratitude for programs that recognized the healing power of the human-animal bond. I thought about James, about how proud he would have been to see me standing up for myself and for the therapeutic work that animals could do. I thought about Rose, who had trusted me with Napoleon's care, never knowing that her careful training and documentation would someday lead to this moment of recognition and celebration. And I thought about all the assumptions people make about what healing looks like. Karen had seen a woman with an unusual animal and assumed fraud. She'd seen my name and my face and made judgments about who deserved compassion and who deserved suspicion. But healing comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a peacock who sits with you through the darkest nights. Sometimes it's a community of strangers who rally around justice and kindness. Sometimes it's the perfect irony of a complaint that backfires so spectacularly that it becomes a celebration. Just as the demonstration was winding down, Sarah approached me with a folder. Dr. Chen, I have one more surprise for you. She opened the folder to reveal a letter with official government letterhead. This is from the Department of Transportation's Therapy Animal Initiative. When they heard about today's events, and they heard very quickly, thanks to social media, they asked me to deliver this personally. I opened the letter with shaking hands. Dear Dr. Chen, we have received multiple reports about the extraordinary demonstration of therapeutic techniques performed by your emotional support animal, Napoleon, at Columbus International Airport today. Based on witness statements and video documentation, we would like to formally invite you and Napoleon to participate in our national training program for therapy animal handlers. Your background as a veterinarian, combined with Napoleon's exceptional training and your obvious skill as his handler, make you ideal candidates for our instructor certification program. This position would involve traveling to airports, hospitals, and other facilities across the country to train new therapy animal teams and demonstrate best practices in animal-assisted therapy. The position includes full travel expenses, professional compensation, and the opportunity to help establish therapy animal programs in underserved communities. If you are interested in this opportunity, please contact our office at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Dr. Patricia Williams, Director, Federal Therapy Animal Initiative. I read the letter twice, then looked up at Sarah in amazement. They're offering me a job? Not just any job, Sarah said. They're offering you the chance to help create a national network of therapy animal programs. You and Napoleon would be pioneers. I looked over at Napoleon, who was still calmly accepting admiration from travelers, still providing that sense of peace and comfort that had helped me through my darkest days. James had always said that every ending was also a beginning. I'd thought the end of my veterinary practice was just an ending. But maybe it was the beginning of something even more meaningful. There's one more thing, Sarah said with a grin. The job comes with a special certification that would allow Napoleon to travel on any commercial airline as a working therapy animal. No more worrying about documentation or complaints from other passengers. She gestured toward Karen, who was still standing miserably at the edge of the crowd, waiting for Officer Williams to finish his report. Though I have a feeling word is going to spread pretty quickly about what happens when someone challenges Napoleon's credentials. 2 hours later, as I settled into my first-class seat with Napoleon's carrier securely positioned beside me, I reflected on the most extraordinary day of my life. The flight attendant, who had already heard about our morning adventure, stopped by our seats. Dr. Chen, the captain wanted me to tell you that we're honored to have you and Napoleon aboard today. If there's anything you need during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask. She leaned closer and whispered, also, the passenger who filed the complaint about Napoleon. She ended up missing her flight while completing the incident report. Apparently, she had to rebook on a later flight. In the middle seat of economy. I tried to feel sorry for Karen, but honestly, the poetic justice was too perfect. As the plane lifted off, Napoleon settled into his travel position and made those soft, comforting sounds that had become the soundtrack to my healing. Through the window, I could see Ohio disappearing below us, the state where I'd built my career, lost my husband, and discovered that sometimes the most unexpected things can save you. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter, "Mom, you're viral." Someone posted a video of Napoleon's airport demo and it has 50,000 views. I'm so proud of you both. I smiled and closed my eyes. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a grief-stricken widow closing the final chapter of her professional life. Today, I was Dr. Margaret Chen, certified therapy animal handler, about to embark on a new career helping others heal from trauma and loss. And Napoleon? Napoleon was exactly what he'd always been, a beautiful, intelligent, deeply empathetic creature whose mere presence reminded people that healing comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most profound connections happen between species, not within them. The flight attendant made an announcement, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special passenger aboard today. Napoleon, our honorary therapy peacock, and his handler Dr. Chen are traveling to California to begin new work with the Federal Therapy Animal Program. If you're interested in learning more about therapy animals or if you're experiencing anxiety about flying, Dr. Chen has graciously offered to answer questions during our flight." I opened my eyes to see dozens of passengers turning in their seats, smiling, some already unbuckling their seatbelts to come meet Napoleon. It was going to be a beautiful flight. And somewhere below us, Karen was probably still sitting in the airport, waiting for her rescheduled departure and wondering how her simple complaint had turned into the most viral therapy animal video of the year. Sometimes, the universe has a sense of humor. Sometimes, justice comes with tail feathers and a soft, comforting voice. And sometimes, the very thing someone tries to use against you becomes the thing that changes your life forever. Napoleon made one of his gentle sounds, and I reached over to touch his carrier. "We did good today, didn't we, beautiful boy?" His response sounded remarkably like agreement. And for the first time since James died, I felt ready for whatever came next. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't finished with surprises. 3 months after that extraordinary day at Columbus International Airport, I was sitting in my new office in San Diego, reviewing applications for the Federal Therapy Animal Initiative's newest training program, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Dr. Chen, you have a visitor." "She says it's about Napoleon?" I looked up from my paperwork, puzzled. Napoleon was outside in his specialized outdoor enclosure, leading a therapy session with a group of veterans dealing with PTSD. Through my window, I could see him positioned perfectly among the group, his magnificent tail feathers creating a natural focal point while his calm presence helped the men and women work through their trauma. "Did she give a name?" "Karen Morrison. She says you'll remember her from an airport incident?" My blood ran cold. Karen, the woman who had tried to humiliate me and Napoleon, who had made those awful assumptions, who had triggered the chain of events that ultimately changed my life. What could she possibly want? "Send her in." A few moments later, Karen walked into my office. But this wasn't the perfectly coiffed, arrogant woman I remembered from the airport. Her hair was simpler, her clothes more modest, and her entire demeanor was different, humbled, somehow. "Dr. Chen," she said quietly, "thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Please, sit down. I have to admit, I'm curious about what brings you here. She sat down carefully, clutching a folder in her hands. I need to tell you something. And I need to apologize. For a long moment, she just stared at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. That day at the airport, I was having the worst day of my life, and I took it out on you and Napoleon. But that's not an excuse. There's no excuse for how I behaved. She opened the folder and pulled out several printed articles. After that day, after the video went viral, after I became the face of report Karen behavior, I lost my job. My company said my actions reflected poorly on their values. I felt a pang of sympathy, despite everything she'd put me through. At first, I was furious, she continued. I blamed you, I blamed Napoleon, I blamed the airport. But then my daughter, she stopped talking to me. Her voice broke slightly. My daughter has anxiety and depression. She's had an emotional support dog for 3 years, and it's been life-changing for her. When she saw the video of me attacking you and Napoleon, she said she was ashamed to be related to me. Karen wiped her eyes with a tissue. She said, Mom, how could you attack someone who was just trying to heal from grief? How could you mock the same kind of support that saved my life? I remained silent, letting her continue. That's when I started researching. I learned about the Federal Therapy Animal Initiative. I learned about Napoleon's history, about his work with veterans and trauma survivors. I learned about your career, your husband's death, your move to California. She pulled out another document. And I learned about Rose Morrison. My heart skipped. Rose? Napoleon's previous owner? Rose Morrison was my aunt. The world seemed to stop spinning. Your aunt? Karen nodded, tears flowing freely now. Aunt Rose was my father's sister. When she passed away last year, I was so wrapped up in my own life that I barely paid attention to the details of her will. I knew she'd had some kind of bird, but I never understood the significance. She handed me a letter with Rose's familiar handwriting. This was in her papers. It's addressed to Napoleon's new family. With shaking hands, I opened the letter. To the family who has welcomed Napoleon into their hearts. If you are reading this, it means I am gone and Napoleon has found his new purpose. I want you to know that Napoleon is more than just a beautiful bird. He is a healer, a comforter, and a bridge between the world of the living and the memory of those we've lost. When Harold died, I thought I would die too. The grief was so overwhelming that I couldn't imagine surviving it. But Napoleon sat with me through the darkest nights, and somehow his presence reminded me that beauty and peace could coexist with sorrow. I trained him not just for my own healing, but because I knew that someday, he would need to help someone else. The certification process was lengthy and sometimes difficult, but I knew Napoleon had a gift that needed to be shared. To his new family, please know that you are not just Napoleon's caretakers, you are his partners in a sacred mission. Every person he comforts, every moment of peace he provides, every life he touches is part of a legacy of healing that stretches back through all the hearts he has helped mend. Harold always said that love doesn't end with death, it just changes form. Napoleon is one of those changed forms of love, carrying comfort from one grieving heart to another. Please love him as we loved him. Please trust him as we trusted him. And please know that somewhere, Harold and I are watching with pride as Napoleon continues his work. With all our love and gratitude. Rose and Harold Morrison. I read the letter twice, tears streaming down my face. Rose had known. Somehow, she had known that Napoleon would find his way to exactly where he needed to be. Dr. Chen, Karen said softly, I didn't just come here to apologize. I came to ask if there was any way I could make amends. She pulled out one final document. When I learned about the therapy animal program, when I understood what Napoleon and you were doing, I wanted to contribute. She handed me a check. The amount made me gasp. Karen, this is $50,000. It's what I had in my savings account, she said simply. I know it can't undo what I did, but I hoped it might help the program expand. Maybe help train more therapy animal teams, or provide scholarships for people who can't afford the certification process. I stared at the check, overwhelmed. There's one more thing, Karen said. My daughter, she wants to apply for the training program. She and her emotional support dog, Bailey. After she saw what happened with Napoleon, she said she wanted to help other people the way Bailey helped her. She looked out the window toward where Napoleon was still conducting his therapy session. I was hoping If you could forgive me, that maybe I could volunteer with the program. I have business experience, organizational skills. I could help with fundraising or administration, or whatever you need. I followed her gaze to Napoleon, who seemed to sense he was being watched. He turned toward the window and made one of his gentle conversational sounds, the same sound he'd made that first day when Karen had been attacking us. But now I understood what that sound meant. It wasn't just comfort, it was forgiveness. Karen, I said slowly, what you did that day was hurtful and wrong. But what came out of it? Napoleon's recognition, the expansion of the therapy animal program, the thousands of people who have learned about legitimate emotional support animals because of that viral video. The new beginning. 6 months later, Karen had become one of our most effective volunteers. Her business background helped us secure grants and partnerships that tripled the size of our training program. Her daughter Jessica and Bailey had graduated from our certification course and were working with teenagers struggling with anxiety and depression. But the most remarkable transformation was in Karen herself. She'd learned to channel her natural intensity into advocacy instead of judgment. She spoke at conferences about the importance of disability rights and the dangers of making assumptions about people's needs for support animals. I was the poster child for everything wrong with how we treat people with invisible disabilities, she would tell audiences. I let my own biases and bad day turn me into someone I didn't recognize. But Napoleon and Dr. Chen taught me that healing isn't just for the people who need therapy animals, sometimes it's for the people who learn to see those animals for what they really are. The video of that airport confrontation now had over 10 million views, but the comments section had evolved too. Instead of just mocking Karen's behavior, people shared their own stories of judgment and redemption, of assumptions challenged and minds changed. Napoleon, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity in the therapy animal world. He'd been featured in documentaries, visited children's hospitals across the country, and had even been invited to Washington, D.C. to demonstrate animal-assisted therapy techniques for congressional representatives considering expanded funding for the program. But his favorite work remained the same as always, sitting quietly with people in pain, offering his peaceful presence as a bridge between grief and hope. 1 year after the airport incident, I received an unexpected phone call from Officer Williams, the security officer who had first investigated Karen's complaint. Dr. Chen, you might find this interesting. We just received a commendation from the Department of Transportation about how our airport handled the Napoleon incident. Apparently, it's being used as a case study in airports across the country for how to properly investigate and resolve complaints about service and support animals. He chuckled. The report specifically mentions that the incident led to improved training for security personnel, better public awareness of legitimate therapy animals, and a measurable increase in positive interactions between airport staff and passengers with disabilities. That's wonderful, I said. But here's the really interesting part, Officer Williams continued. The woman who filed the original complaint, Karen Morrison, she's been hired by the airport as a consultant. She's helping develop training materials to teach staff how to approach these situations with more sensitivity and proper legal knowledge. I nearly dropped the phone. Karen is working for the airport? Apparently, her experience, both the negative and the positive aftermath, gave her unique insights into how these situations can go wrong and how to make them go right. The airport's Disability Services Coordinator said she's been invaluable in helping them understand the passenger's perspective. After I hung up, I walked outside to Napoleon's enclosure, where he was enjoying the afternoon sun. His feathers caught the light, creating that familiar rainbow effect that had mesmerized so many people over the past year. You know what, Napoleon? I said, sitting down beside his favorite perch. I think Rose and Harold would be proud of what you've accomplished. He made that soft, conversational sound that I'd come to recognize as his way of saying he understood. You didn't just help me heal from losing James. You helped Karen heal from being someone she didn't want to be. You helped Jessica find her calling as a therapy animal handler. You helped an entire airport system improve how they treat people with disabilities. Napoleon moved closer and gently touched my hand with his beak, his version of a hug. Rose was right, I continued. Love doesn't end with death. It just changes form. And sometimes, it changes people who thought they were beyond changing. As the sun set over San Diego, I thought about the ripple effects of that terrible, wonderful day at the airport. How Karen's attempt to humiliate me had instead elevated Napoleon to national recognition. How my worst travel experience had become the catalyst for the best career opportunity of my life. How one viral video had sparked conversations about disability rights, grief, healing, and the profound connections between humans and animals. But mostly, I thought about Rose's words: Napoleon is carrying comfort from one grieving heart to another. That's exactly what he'd done. He'd carried comfort to me after James died. He'd carried it to dozens of veterans struggling with PTSD. He'd carried it to children facing medical procedures and adults dealing with trauma. And somehow, in the most unexpected way, he'd even carried it to Karen, helping her find a path from shame to redemption, from judgment to advocacy, from being the problem to being part of the solution. Napoleon made one final soft sound as the last light faded from the sky, and I could swear it sounded like contentment. We'd all found our way home.